By 6:15 on Christmas morning, my daughter-in-law was standing in my kitchen with 30 guests coming. No turkey in the oven, no potatoes peeled, and my house keys sitting on the counter beside a note. She thought I was too soft to say no. She forgot soft things can still walk away. My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 63 years old, a retired nurse, and for 11 years I have cooked every Christmas, every birthday, every Easter, every baby shower this family has ever had. I want to tell you exactly how I ended up leaving my own keys on my own counter on Christmas morning, and exactly what happened to the 30 people who showed up expecting a dinner I never agreed to make. I spent 31 years as a labor and delivery nurse before I retired. 12-hour shifts, holidays working while other families open presents, more than a few Christmases spent catching someone else's baby instead of eating my own dinner. When I finally retired 5 years ago, I promised myself I would spend the holidays differently. Slower. Warmer. Surrounded by my own family for once instead of strangers in a hospital ward. For a while, that's exactly what happened. My husband, Tom, passed almost 4 years ago now, quietly in his sleep, 3 days after Christmas, which is its own kind of cruelty, if you've ever lived it. After that, cooking for the family became something more than tradition. It became the thing that kept the house from feeling empty. I told myself I loved doing it. And for a long time that was true. I have one son, Brian. Good-hearted, a little conflict avoidant. The kind of man who was raised by a mother who solved problems so he never really had to learn how. 6 years ago he married Vanessa. I want to be fair to Vanessa before I tell you what she did, because this isn't really a story about a villain. It's a story about how slowly, and how politely, a person can start treating you like staff instead of family, until one Christmas morning makes the whole pattern impossible to unsee. Vanessa is 34, sharp, stylish, the kind of person who never leaves the house without looking like she's about to be photographed, which, as it turns out, is not entirely a coincidence. She runs a small home goods page online, the kind with matching linen napkins and perfectly lit charcuterie boards, and she hosts constantly dinner parties, brunches, intimate gatherings that somehow always have 20 people in them. Here is the thing about Vanessa I noticed early on and dismissed for years. She does not ask. She assigns. It's a small distinction, and for a long time I told myself it didn't matter. A request and an assignment can sound almost identical if you're being polite about both. Would you mind bringing the pie? Sounds like a question. You're doing pie again, right? Sounds like a question too, if you're not paying close attention to the tone underneath it. I wasn't paying close attention. Not for years. I loved my son. I wanted a relationship with his wife, and I told myself that helping generously was simply who I was as a mother-in-law. I didn't yet understand that generosity, when it's never questioned, quietly turns into an expectation. And expectations, unlike gifts, are never thanked. I want to give you 3 moments before we get to Christmas, because none of them, on their own, would sound like much. That's exactly the problem. That's how it works. The first happened in October. Vanessa texted me on a Tuesday. Can you bake cupcakes for my office holiday party? Like 3 dozen? Thursday works. Not would you be able to, not I know it's short notice. Just an assignment with an exclamation point at the end, like the exclamation point did the work of asking. I baked 3 dozen cupcakes on a Wednesday night, alone in my kitchen at 9 p.m., and never heard a single word about how they turned out. The second happened in November. A message at 8 p.m. on a Friday. Can you watch the kids tomorrow? Brian and I have that thing. 1 day's notice for a full day of childcare delivered like a formality rather than a favor. I said yes because I always said yes, and because I do genuinely love my grandchildren. But I noticed, that time, a small flicker of resentment I didn't like feeling. The third happened at Thanksgiving, actually a preview of what was coming. Vanessa invited 6 extra people to Thanksgiving dinner without mentioning it to me until the day itself, walking into my kitchen and saying, breezily, over her shoulder while checking her phone, "Oh, I invited the Hendersons and their kids too. You don't mind helping stretch things a bit, right?" Not a question really. A statement wearing a question's punctuation. Nobody in that family, in any of those moments, said thank you in a way that felt like it meant anything. Thank yous had become a formality too. The way please gets stripped of meaning when it's used to soften a command instead of ask a favor. I want to be honest. I didn't say anything. Not once. I told myself I was being a good mother, a good mother-in-law, a good grandmother. I didn't yet understand I was also teaching everyone in that family exactly how little pushback my kindness required. 3 weeks before Christmas, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa that I have now read probably 40 times since. Christmas dinner is at your house this year. 30 people confirmed. I'll send the menu Christmas tree. I stared at it for a long moment. 30 people. Not 15. Not the usual 12 to 14 we'd done in years past. 30. 10 minutes later, the menu arrived in a neat little numbered list, the kind of list you'd send a caterer, not a mother-in-law. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, green beans, stuffing, cranberry sauce, gravy, dinner rolls, sweet potato casserole, 3 pies, a cheese board, punch, full table setup, guest seating arranged by name. Then the final message came through, and this is the one that changed everything. Start early. I'll bring the decorations. The house is yours. The house is yours. I read that sentence probably a dozen times that night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with my phone glowing in the dark. It's such a strange thing to say about a house that has always, technically, belonged to me. But I understood exactly what she meant by it. Even if she didn't say it directly. She meant, the labor is yours. The cost is yours. The exhaustion is yours. The house is simply where all of that would take place. I did try. I want that on the record because for a long time afterward, part of me wondered if I should have tried harder, spoken up sooner, been less agreeable for the past 6 years. But I did try that time. I wrote back, Vanessa, that is too much food for one person. We need to split the cooking, or hire some help, or scale the guest list down. Her reply came almost instantly, cheerful, warm, and completely unmoved. Oh Mom, you're the best at this. Nobody does Christmas like you. Don't make it complicated. 2 hearts. I sat with that message for a long time. It took me a while to name exactly what bothered me about it, because on the surface, it sounds like a compliment. But it isn't. It's a redirection. I raised a real, practical concern. 30 people, 1 pair of hands, a full holiday menu. And it was answered not with a solution, but with flattery designed to make my concern disappear. Don't make it complicated. As if the complication was my attitude, and not the math. I decided to try one more avenue before Christmas. I called my son. Brian, I said when he picked up. I can't cook for 30 people alone. It's not physically possible, and even if it were, it isn't fair to ask. There was a pause on the line. I could hear him exhale, the particular exhale of a man who has decided, before the conversation even starts, that he is not going to be the one to have the harder discussion. Mom, please, he said. Just this once. Vanessa already invited everyone. It would be really embarrassing to change it now. I want you to notice what that sentence prioritized. Not my back, which has never fully recovered from decades of hospital shifts. Not my time, or my exhaustion. Or the fact that I was being asked to single-handedly cater a dinner party for his wife's boss and business partners without anyone once asking if I wanted to. What mattered in that sentence was Vanessa's potential embarrassment. That line hurt more than anything Vanessa had said. Because Vanessa, at least, had never pretended to fully see me. Brian was supposed to. I said quietly, "All right, Brian," and hung up the phone, and sat in my kitchen for a long time afterward. Looking at that Christmas menu still open on my screen. Something in me had gone very still and very clear. A few days later, almost by accident, I found out something that changed the shape of everything. I was helping Vanessa's mother, Diane, address some holiday cards when I saw the guest list she'd printed out for Vanessa. The actual 30 names. I recognized maybe half of them as family. The other half were names I didn't know at all. When I asked Diane casually who they were, she said without thinking much of it, "Oh, that's Brian's boss and his wife, 2 of Vanessa's business partners from the homepage, and I think a few neighbors she's been trying to get closer to." I felt something settle into place that I'd been avoiding for weeks. This was never really a family Christmas. It was a showcase. A curated, photographed, fully catered event. Using my house as the venue and my hands as the unpaid labor, so that Vanessa could impress her boss, her business contacts, and her carefully chosen neighbors with a homemade family Christmas that she had contributed nothing to but a menu and some decorations. I wasn't being treated like family that day. I was being treated like catering. And catering, unlike family, is allowed to say no. I called my sister Elaine that same evening. Elaine lives 2 hours north, in a small cabin on a quiet lake, the kind of place with no cell signal to speak of and a wood stove that runs all winter. "Come here for Christmas," she said, almost before I'd finished explaining. "No cooking. No guests. Just coffee, soup and peace." I didn't argue with Vanessa again after that. I didn't send an angry message, didn't call another family meeting, didn't try one more time to explain the math of 30 plates and 2 hands. I had spent 6 years explaining myself to people who weren't listening. I was done explaining. I booked a car to pick me up at 5 a.m. on Christmas morning. Quietly, I packed a single suitcase. And I began, for the first time in this entire story, to feel something close to calm. On Christmas Eve night, after everyone had gone to bed in their own homes, I sat alone at my kitchen table one last time and wrote a note. Not an angry one. I didn't want anger to be the last thing that room held of me. "Brian, I love you. Vanessa, I hope your guests enjoy the home you plan to use." I said 30 people was too much for me alone, but no one listened. So this Christmas, I chose peace. "The house is yours, Mom." I read it back once, folded it, and set it on the counter beside my house keys. The same counter where, 3 weeks earlier, a menu for 30 people had first appeared on my phone screen. Somehow it felt right, leaving both things in the exact same spot. The demand had started there. It seemed fitting the answer would end there too. At 5:10 a.m. on Christmas morning, I zipped up my coat, picked up my suitcase, and walked out my own front door into the cold, dark quiet of a street that hadn't woken up yet. No shouting. No slammed door. No dramatic goodbye speech I'd rehearsed in the mirror. Just a suitcase, a coat, a set of keys left behind, and silence. I got into the car Elaine had arranged, looked back once at my house with its dark windows, and let myself exhale for what felt like the first time in 3 weeks. At 6:30 that morning, Vanessa let herself into the house, my house, wearing a festive red apron she'd clearly bought specifically for this occasion, phone already out, ready to film a cheerful Christmas morning prep video for her page. The kitchen was cold and dark and silent. No turkey in the oven. No patatos peeled. No pies cooling on the counter. No sounds of anyone cooking, because there was no one there to cook. Just the keys, sitting exactly where I'd left them, beside a folded note with her name on it. She called me first. I didn't answer. My phone was already turned face down in Elaine's cabin, 2 hours and a world away. Then she called Brian, panicked, barely coherent. He arrived 20 minutes later, still in his pajama pants, and found her standing in the middle of the kitchen holding the note, her festive apron looking suddenly like a costume for a party that wasn't going to happen. He read it. I imagine it took him only a few seconds to remember the phone call 3 weeks earlier. The one where he'd told his mother, just this once. The one where he'd chosen his wife's comfort over his mother's exhaustion without a second thought. Now there were 30 guests arriving in a matter of hours and nothing, not one dish was ready. What followed was, by every account I heard afterward, a small disaster. The grocery stores that were even open on Christmas morning were nearly emptied out. The turkey they managed to find was still frozen solid. Restaurants were fully booked weeks in advance, as restaurants always are on Christmas. The one bakery open nearby had exactly 2 pies left, both slightly damaged in the display case. Christmas dinner for 30 people became, by 1 p.m., a collection of grocery store rotisserie chickens, instant mashed potatoes, store-bought dinner rolls, canned gravy, and a supermarket pie sliced into far too many pieces to go around. Guests noticed. Of course they noticed. Brian's boss noticed, in particular. The exact person Vanessa had most wanted to impress with a warm, homemade family Christmas. Instead, he got instant potatoes and an obviously frazzled hostess who kept disappearing into the kitchen to make increasingly frantic phone calls that no one answered. Brian told me later that he spent most of that dinner not eating, just watching. Watching his wife's forced smile. Watching the guests exchange polite, confused glances over grocery store chicken. Watching the empty chair where I would have been sitting, every year before this one. He said it was the first time in 6 years he actually did the math. Every holiday. Every dinner. Every you don't mind helping, right? All of it, quietly absorbed, quietly unthanked for years. He realized, sitting at that half-catered table, that his mother hadn't ruined Christmas. They had. And his silence, every single time, had made him part of it. 2 hours north, none of that reached me. Not yet. I spent Christmas morning at Elaine's kitchen table, watching snow fall outside a frost-covered window, drinking coffee that stayed hot because no one needed me to refill anyone else's cup first. We had soup for dinner. Simple, slow, unhurried soup, eaten at whatever pace we liked. Nobody asked me where the gravy was. Nobody assigned me a menu with 15 items on it. Nobody told me, with a compliment shaped like a command, not to make things complicated. My phone buzzed against the counter, again and again, through the afternoon. I glanced at it once, saw Vanessa's name, then Brian's, then Vanessa's again. I turned it face down and went back to my coffee. I listened to the voicemail 2 days later, once I felt ready. It was Brian. His voice sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. "Mom," he said. "I'm sorry. You told me it was too much and I didn't listen." I cried, listening to that message, sitting by Elaine's wood stove with the lake frozen solid outside the window. But I want to be clear about something. I wasn't crying from guilt. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel a single trace of guilt. I was crying from relief. Brian visited me the following week. He apologized properly this time, not a rushed sentence squeezed in before asking for another favor, but a real conversation, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, finally looking at me instead of past me. "I love you," I told him. "But love does not mean I disappear every time your wife needs me to make her look good." Vanessa, for her part, tried a different angle at first. She told a few people I had embarrassed her by leaving. When she finally said something similar to my face, I answered her as calmly as I'd written that note. "No, Vanessa," I said. "You embarrassed yourself when you planned a Christmas dinner around my labor without ever once asking me." She didn't have an answer for that. I don't think she'd ever considered that there might be one required. I won't tell you this story ends in some perfect, tidy way, because it doesn't, and I don't trust stories that claim it does. But something in the family did shift, genuinely, after that Christmas. Brian started asking instead of assuming, small things at first but real ones. Vanessa stopped assigning tasks disguised as compliments. And I have hosted exactly one holiday since then, entirely by choice, with a menu I picked myself and a guest list I actually approved. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do isn't fighting, or arguing, or explaining herself for the 100th time to people who've already decided not to listen. Sometimes it's simply leaving the keys behind and choosing herself.